He was a TikTok star with nearly 1 million fans, known for his spot-on impressions and perfect smile. But behind the viral fame, darkness was growing. In 2021, laughter turned to horror when Jin Kid, real name Ali Abulabin, became the center of a double murder case that shocked America. In 2021, San Diego was the backdrop for a story that shocked both the online world and those closest to it. A tragedy born from jealousy, obsession, and the collapse of a marriage under public scrutiny. At the center of it was Ali Nasser Abulabin, better known to millions on TikTok as Jin Kid. Ali, then in his late 20s, was known for his quick impressions, comedic skits, and uncanny ability to mimic famous voices. His content earned him nearly 1 million followers and a growing presence online. To his audience, he was the funny, charming creator with an infectious personality. But behind that digital persona, his personal life was unraveling fast. Ali had built his online fame from his home in San Diego, California, where he lived with his wife, Anna Marie Abulabin, 28, and their young daughter, Amira. On social media, the couple seemed to have the perfect life: a handsome husband, a beautiful wife, and a picture of success. But privately, the marriage had become toxic. Friends would later describe a relationship marked by control, jealousy, and arguments that escalated over time. Ali's growing obsession with his image and suspicions about Anna's faithfulness began to consume him. Ali worked previously in IT, but had shifted most of his focus to social media. His comedic impersonations and skits often centered on pop culture, video games, and impressions of movie characters. The attention from followers fed his ego, but at home, Anna was growing distant. She wanted peace and stability for herself and her daughter, not the tension and volatility that had become their daily life. Over time, their fights became more explosive, and friends started noticing signs of verbal and emotional abuse. By late 2021, the situation had reached a breaking point. Anna decided to separate from Ali. She wanted space and had begun talking about divorce. In October, she took a step further. She told him to move out of their shared apartment at the Spire San Diego Apartments, a high-rise building in the East Village neighborhood. The unit sat on the 35th floor overlooking the city and had once been their dream home. But now, it became the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Ali moved into a hotel not far from their apartment, but he couldn't let go. Friends later said he became obsessed with knowing what Anna was doing, who she was seeing, and whether she had already moved on. In his mind, Anna's growing independence was proof that she was seeing someone else. Instead of trying to rebuild his life or focus on his daughter, Ali began to spiral. He turned to cocaine, drank heavily, and stayed awake for long stretches. His paranoia deepened. In a disturbing twist, Ali installed a listening device on Amira's iPad, one that could record conversations inside the apartment. The tablet was synced to his phone, allowing him to eavesdrop on Anna from his hotel room. This act of digital spying became the seed of what was to come. The man once celebrated for his humor and creativity was now secretly monitoring his estranged wife. On October 21, 2021, the day that would end in tragedy, Ali sat in his hotel room, listening through that iPad feed. What he heard triggered his worst fears. Anna wasn't alone. With her was Rayburn Cardenas Barron, a 29-year-old man described as kind, outgoing, and friendly. Barron worked locally and had known Anna for a short time. To Ali, their presence together confirmed everything he had convinced himself to believe, that his wife was betraying him. According to investigators, Ali became enraged. His jealousy boiled over, and reason disappeared. He armed himself with a handgun, left his hotel, and drove straight to the apartment building he once called home. Surveillance footage would later show him entering the building that afternoon. Ali still had access to the apartment. He used a copied key, or pass, and went up to the 35th floor. As he reached the door, the audio from the iPad was still playing on his phone. He could hear laughter and conversation. He waited only moments before entering. Inside, Anna and Rayburn were in the living room. What happened next took less than a second. The prosecutor later said it was execution style. Ali pulled out his gun and opened fire. Barron was hit first, 3 times, including in the neck and back. Anna was shot once in the head. Both died instantly. The sound of gunfire echoed through the apartment, shattering the calm of the upscale high-rise. After the shooting, Ali didn't stay. He didn't call the police or check on his victims. Instead, he left the scene and drove away. Investigators later discovered that before leaving, he had called his mother. During that call, Ali allegedly confessed to what he'd done. He told her that he had hurt Anna. Then, in what can only be described as a desperate act, he went to pick up his daughter from school. Police were already on the alert. Witnesses had reported hearing gunshots, and calls to 911 started coming in from neighbors. When officers arrived at the apartment, they found both victims dead in the living room. The scene was quiet except for the hum of city noise from outside the tall glass windows. Ali was stopped by police on Interstate 15, with his daughter in the car. Officers described him as emotional and agitated. He was taken into custody without resistance. From that moment, his life as a rising internet celebrity was over. The news spread quickly. TikTok star Jin Kid, arrested for double murder, dominated headlines. For many who followed him online, it didn't seem real. The man who made people laugh through short videos had now been accused of killing his wife and her friend in cold blood. As the investigation unfolded, more details came to light. Police found evidence linking him to the crime, including shell casings matching his firearm and the surveillance footage of him entering the building just minutes before the shooting. They also uncovered the iPad recordings, which became a key piece of evidence, showing the level of obsession and control he had over Anna even after their separation. Friends and family of both victims described Anna as a loving mother who wanted to move forward and rebuild her life. She had endured years of emotional ups and downs and had finally started to see hope for the future. Rayburn, her friend, was remembered as a cheerful man with no idea of the danger waiting that day. Ali, meanwhile, began to shift his story. During questioning, he admitted to the killings, but claimed he had snapped. He said he didn't plan it, that the sound of another man's voice in his home pushed him over the edge. But police believed otherwise. They saw clear signs of premeditation, spying on Anna, bringing a gun, and driving to the apartment fully aware of what he intended to do. By the time the charges were filed, the district attorney's office described the case as one of first-degree murder, with special circumstances. It wasn't a crime of passion, they argued, but a deliberate act carried out by someone who refused to accept rejection. The trial for the 2021 double murder began in April 2024, nearly 2.5 years after that October day. The courtroom in San Diego reflected the weight of a case that had drawn national attention. For the families, for Anna and Rayburn's friends, and for anyone who watched Ali Jin Kid online, this was a moment that would settle the question: was this crime premeditated or a tragic heat-of-passion explosion? From day one, prosecutors laid out their narrative clearly. They showed video from building security, elevator footage, and hallway cameras that placed Ali at the Spire building shortly before the murders. They introduced digital evidence, messages, search histories, phone activity that suggested planning and obsession. They also unveiled the recordings from the iPad, the very device Ali used to spy on Anna, which they said wired him to her most private conversations. Witnesses were called: neighbors who reported hearing gunshots, building staff who saw someone enter under suspicious circumstances, forensic experts who matched the shell casings to Ali's gun. Some testified about prior domestic incidents. One witness said that months before the murders, Anna had told her friends that Ali had been physically abusive. On another occasion, Ali admitted during cross-examination to an argument in which he punched Anna, a story he had tried to soften earlier. Ali's own testimony came mid-trial. He sat in the witness stand and recounted how the relationship with Anna had deteriorated. He admitted to drug use, cocaine, and said he was under immense stress. He described long stretches of paranoia, nights without sleep, and growing conviction that Anna was seeing someone else. He said his mind was twisting under pressure. When asked directly about the murders, Ali claimed he did not plan to kill. He said that after spying on Anna and hearing her conversation with Rayburn, he drove to the apartment intending, he said, to confront her. He claimed that as soon as he walked in, he lost control. "Before I could stop myself, I snapped," he told jurors. "I'm shooting and I can't stop." He said it was not deliberate murder, but an impulsive act in response to perceived betrayal. Cross-examination was ruthless. The prosecution pointed out that the audio recordings caught gunshots a second or so after Ali entered, suggesting no hesitation or pause. They highlighted Google searches and prior behavior that suggested Ali had considered what he would do. They questioned why he had the gun ready in the first place and why he fled the scene instead of calling 911. They questioned the plausibility of snapping in such a precise moment. Ali's mother, Dalal Wara, also testified. She said he called her soon after the shooting and admitted what he had done. She described the tone of his voice, the panic, and the weight of the confession. This testimony would cut both ways. Prosecution used it to strengthen the link between Ali and the crime. Defense tried to frame it as an emotional reaction rather than proof of premeditation. Defense attorneys argued that Ali was emotionally volatile and mentally ill, that he had grown up in a troubled home, and that his addiction to cocaine had weakened his ability to control impulses. They presented expert testimony about mental health struggles and the fragile state in which Ali claimed he'd lived before the tragedy. They painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by his own jealous thoughts, not a cold-blooded killer. Still, the prosecution pushed back hard. They emphasized that Ali had retained a key to the apartment after the separation, allowing access. They argued that the surveillance via the iPad was not happenstance, but a carefully designed tool to maintain control over Anna's life after she left. They described a man who refused to accept that the relationship was over. The special circumstances the prosecution sought included not just multiple murders, but the use of a firearm and deliberate planning. In closing arguments, prosecutors told jurors this was a case of power and control. They framed Ali's actions as the ultimate act of domination. If he could not have Anna, then no one could. The defense, by contrast, pleaded for understanding, urging the jury to accept that Ali's mental state had fractured the boundary between thought and action. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on May 29, 2024. Ali was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, and special circumstances were affirmed. That verdict closed the chapter of guilt or innocence and shifted the focus to punishment. Though the jury's decision spoke volumes, questions and tensions lingered. Had Ali truly snapped, or had he committed a calculated act? Could the defense's mental health claims have softened a harsher judgment? How would the court interpret remorse, if any? How would Anna's family see justice done? And for Amira, their daughter, torn between 2 worlds, what future lay ahead? As the courtroom emptied and media gathered outside, the public would later see footage of Ali wiping tears from his cheeks. Yet many remained unconvinced of his remorse. Statements from Anna's father and Rayburn's family would echo in the community. 2 lives lost, and a sense that control, betrayal, and obsession had created a fatal outcome. After the jury delivered its verdict, the courtroom in downtown San Diego settled into a heavy silence. The man once known as Jin Kid, the online comedian who made thousands laugh with his impressions, now stood guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. For the families of Anna Abulabin and Rayburn Barron, it was the verdict they had waited years for. But it didn't bring relief. Nothing could undo what had been lost. The next step was sentencing, and that final stage would reveal the depth of the tragedy left behind. In the weeks following the verdict, prosecutors prepared their closing motions, while the defense submitted statements, highlighting Ali's emotional instability, addiction, and trauma. They urged the court to consider his mental state, arguing that he was not a monster, but a man destroyed by jealousy and paranoia. But the law in California leaves little room for mercy in cases involving multiple first-degree murders with special circumstances. From the start, the prosecution had made it clear that they would seek the maximum penalty, life without the possibility of parole. As the sentencing hearing began on September 6, 2024, the courtroom filled again. Members of both victims' families sat close together, holding photos of Anna and Rayburn. Anna's parents spoke first. Her mother described her daughter as the light of our family, a woman who wanted nothing more than a peaceful life and a safe home for her child. Her father, his voice breaking, told the judge that the hardest part was explaining to little Amira why her mother wasn't coming back. The pain in their words carried through the room. Next came Rayburn Barron's relatives. They described him as someone full of kindness and laughter, a young man who had a generous heart and a bright future ahead of him. His family said he had been at the wrong place at the wrong time, simply being a friend, unaware that his life would end in a jealous man's rage. They called Ali's actions selfish, deliberate, and unforgivable. When it was Ali's turn to speak, he stood, dressed in a beige jail uniform. His once confident posture was gone, replaced by a tired, sunken demeanor. He apologized, saying, "I'm sorry for what I've done. I wish I could take it back." His voice was shaky, but his words did not move the families. To them, the apology came too late, after too much destruction. The prosecutor told the court that Ali's remorse was not genuine, that his actions after the murders spoke more loudly than his words. He had fled, picked up his daughter, and driven away, leaving 2 bodies behind without even calling for help. Judge Kenneth K. So, who presided over the case, reviewed the evidence and the testimonies one final time. He spoke firmly, saying this was a case defined by control and obsession, a man who refused to accept that his marriage was over, who watched, planned, and ultimately executed 2 innocent people. The judge said this was not a momentary lapse or a crime of passion. It was deliberate, it was cold, and it was final. Then came the sentence: 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years for firearm enhancements. Ali would spend the rest of his life behind bars. There would be no future, no chance for release. The courtroom was still for a moment, then filled with quiet sobs from the victims' families. In the aftermath, the public struggled to make sense of how a man who once brought laughter to so many could commit such a horrific act. News outlets covered the case widely, framing it as a modern cautionary tale, the story of how jealousy, fame, and technology intertwined to create tragedy. Ali's life had been one of contradictions, adored online, yet tormented by insecurity, capable of humor, yet capable of violence. As the days passed, more details emerged about his life before the murders. Friends recalled how fame had changed him. They said that while he enjoyed attention, he also became increasingly controlling and paranoid. He monitored Anna's social media, criticized her clothing, and accused her of being unfaithful. One friend testified that Anna had confided in her, saying she felt trapped. Another said she was finally ready to start over, free from the fear of Ali's temper. Court documents later revealed a pattern of escalating behavior, arguments that turned physical, threats disguised as apologies, and constant monitoring of her movements. When Anna made him leave the apartment, it was meant to be a step toward independence. But instead, Ali turned her decision into proof of betrayal. His addiction to cocaine fueled his instability, and his obsession with controlling Anna became the motive that drove him to commit murder. Investigators pieced together how carefully he had planned his actions. Before the killings, Ali had deleted messages, cleaned his phone history, and made multiple calls to friends and relatives, complaining that Anna was cheating. He even asked one acquaintance if they thought a person could get away with something if they were pushed too far. Those comments would later be used in court to show his intent. The iPad recording, the surveillance camera evidence, and the ballistic match between his gun and the bullets left no doubt about what had happened. After sentencing, reporters caught brief comments from the attorneys. The prosecutor said the case represented a tragic reminder of what happens when control turns into obsession. The defense attorney maintained that Ali's mental health issues and substance abuse were real, and that he was deeply remorseful. But the public opinion was firm. This was a preventable tragedy that had destroyed 3 families and taken 2 innocent lives. Ali's parents, who had supported him quietly throughout the trial, left the courthouse in tears. They had lost their son in a different way. For Anna's family, There was no joy in the verdict, only closure. Outside the courtroom, Anna's brother told reporters, justice was served, but it doesn't bring her back. My sister didn't deserve this. Rayburn didn't deserve this. In the months that followed, true crime documentaries and podcasts picked up the case. The story of Jin Kid became not just about a double murder, but also a reflection of the darker side of social media fame. Many viewers were struck by the contrast. How someone who built a career on humor and relatability could harbor such rage. Experts in psychology and digital culture weighed in, saying fame can magnify insecurity. In Ali's case, the constant need for validation may have deepened his jealousy and paranoia. Anna's family later set up a small foundation in her name to support victims of domestic violence. They wanted her story to be a warning to others that abuse doesn't always start with violence, but with control, jealousy, and surveillance. Her father said in an interview, if she had been protected sooner, maybe this could have been stopped. Maybe she'd still be alive. As for their daughter, Amira, custody was granted to Anna's relatives. Her life had been changed forever. Too young to fully understand what happened, but old enough to remember her parents. The court records note that Ali would have no contact with her for the foreseeable future. Inside prison, Ali remains isolated from the world that once adored him. The man who mimicked celebrities and made millions laugh now lives in silence, under constant guard. No phone, no internet, no camera, just time and memory. The story of Ali Abulabin and the murders of Anna Abulabin and Rayburn Barron stands as one of San Diego's most haunting crimes in recent years. It's a story of love turned poisonous, of control disguised as devotion, and of a man whose need to dominate destroyed everyone he cared about. At its core, this tragedy exposes the danger of unchecked jealousy and obsession. It shows how technology, when twisted by insecurity, can become a weapon. It reminds us that behind the curated lives people share online, there can be deep fractures unseen by the audience. In the end, the Jin Kid case isn't only about crime, it's about consequences. A rising star fell, 2 innocent people lost their lives, and a little girl lost both parents to one act of irreversible rage. The laughter that once followed Ali Abulabin has faded completely, replaced by silence. The sound that lingers after truth, judgment, and justice finally take their course. In the heart of Miami's luxury skyline, a young influencer and her boyfriend seem to have it all: money, fame, and love. But behind closed doors, their perfect life unraveled into chaos, ending in a single deadly moment that left everyone asking, was it self-defense or cold-blooded murder? Miami, Florida, a city known for its sunshine, luxury high-rises, and nightlife. But in April 2022, one of those glossy towers became the scene of a shocking crime that would make headlines across the country. At the center of it was a social media influencer, a successful young man, and a relationship that had spiraled out of control behind closed doors. Courtney Clenny was 26 years old, a well-known OnlyFans model and Instagram influencer, with millions of followers online. To her fans, she was living the perfect Miami dream: expensive cars, ocean views, and a life that looked effortless. But inside her private world, things were very different. She lived with her boyfriend, 27-year-old Christian Tobia Bumsley, in a luxury apartment at the One Paraiso building in Edgewater, a high-rise overlooking Biscayne Bay. Christian, known as Toby to his friends, worked in cryptocurrency and finance. He was charismatic, ambitious, and close to his family and community. Together, the couple seemed like a power pair on social media. But behind the filtered photos and smiling posts, their relationship was breaking down. Friends, neighbors, and building staff would later say the two fought constantly. There were loud arguments, smashed objects, and calls to security. At first, it seemed like a passionate, on-and-off relationship, the kind that burns bright and fast. But over time, it became clear something darker was happening. Courtney and Christian had met in Texas before moving to Miami. They had built their careers in the growing world of online fame and crypto wealth. But as their success grew, so did the tension between them. Courtney was described by people who knew her as confident, outspoken, and sometimes short-tempered. Christian was calm but stubborn, determined to make the relationship work. Yet, according to both families, their love had become toxic long before they moved into that luxury apartment. Neighbors at One Paraíso recalled hearing shouting matches almost every week. Security reports later revealed multiple noise complaints. The police had been called to the apartment several times for domestic disputes. Friends said Courtney had been physically aggressive before, and Christian's friends had encouraged him to leave. But every time, they reconciled. Each breakup was followed by a reunion, each fight by promises to do better. By early 2022, Courtney's social media image was starting to crack. She continued to post sponsored content, but fans began to notice she looked tense and withdrawn. Meanwhile, Christian's friends said he seemed tired and emotionally drained. The relationship was unstable, but the couple stayed together. Then, in April, everything came to a breaking point. On the afternoon of April 3, 2022, Courtney and Christian's argument turned violent. Police reports later said it started over jealousy and accusations of infidelity. In their apartment, Unit 2201, the argument quickly escalated into physical confrontation. According to Courtney's later statement, Christian grabbed her by the throat and shoved her against a wall. Panicked, she said she ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and threw it toward him from about 10 feet away. But investigators found that the wound Christian suffered didn't match that version. The knife had penetrated his chest 3 inches deep, puncturing a major artery near his heart, an injury consistent with a close-range stabbing, not a knife thrown from across the room. At 4:57 p.m., Courtney called 911. Her voice was frantic, saying her boyfriend was dying. When officers arrived, they found her covered in blood, cradling Christian's body on the floor. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but he didn't survive. The Miami police immediately noticed signs of struggle, broken glass, overturned furniture, and blood trails through the living area. Courtney told them it had been self-defense. At first, police didn't arrest her. They questioned her at the scene and later at the station, but released her while they investigated. News outlets quickly caught wind of the story. The headlines were sensational. OnlyFans model stabs boyfriend to death in Miami apartment. Social media exploded with speculation. Some of Courtney's fans defended her, saying she must have been protecting herself. Others accused her of lying and using her fame to avoid charges. As detectives dug deeper, more details came out. Elevator surveillance footage surfaced, showing Courtney attacking Christian just weeks before the stabbing. In the video, she is seen striking him repeatedly while he tries to restrain her and move away. The footage became a key piece of evidence for prosecutors later on. Christian's friends spoke publicly after his death. They described him as kind, gentle, and hardworking, a man who didn't deserve what happened. They said he had confided in them about the abuse, but was afraid to leave. His family, devastated and heartbroken, called for justice. Courtney's side told a different story. Her attorney argued she was the victim, that Christian had been violent toward her many times, and that she acted in self-defense that day. They said she suffered from mental and emotional trauma from repeated abuse and had no intention of killing him. While the investigation continued, Courtney left Miami and moved to Texas, then to Hawaii. She entered a rehab facility for substance and mental health treatment. Meanwhile, prosecutors were building their case. They reviewed texts, security footage, and witness statements, painting a picture of a relationship consumed by jealousy, money problems, and rage. The turning point of the story was the moment the relationship's private violence became public. What had been whispered among friends and neighbors was now fully exposed. The glamorous image of a Miami influencer shattered. In August 2022, 4 months after the stabbing, Courtney Clenny was arrested in Hawaii. The Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office charged her with second-degree murder. The arrest brought the case back into the headlines. At the time of her arrest, she appeared calm and cooperative. Prosecutors described the killing as an intentional act fueled by anger and control, not a desperate act of self-defense. Christian's family welcomed the news, calling it the first step toward justice. They said his death had been treated too lightly at first, and that his life deserved more than a headline. Courtney's defense team immediately countered the charges, saying the prosecution had ignored key evidence showing she had been abused and feared for her life. As the case made its way to court, it became one of the most discussed true crime stories of the year, not only because of who Courtney was, but because of what the case represented: the intersection of social media fame, toxic relationships, and the blurred line between victim and aggressor. By the end of 2022, the world had seen the elevator footage, heard fragments of the 911 call, and read the text messages that showed a volatile, dangerous love story that could not survive. The question that remained was the same one that divided everyone since day one. Was Courtney Clenny a victim defending herself from an abusive boyfriend, or was she an abuser who finally went too far? That question would become the heart of the courtroom drama still to come, and the answer would determine whether Courtney's story ended as a tragedy of survival or a story of guilt and control. Courtney Clenny's arrest in August 2022 marked the start of a legal battle that drew national attention. When the news broke that the Miami influencer had been charged with second-degree murder, the story instantly reignited across social media and television. The image of a glamorous young woman, once known for her lifestyle content and luxurious apartment views, now appeared in mugshots and courtroom sketches. Behind that image stood the question that would define the case: was this self-defense or murder? After her arrest in Hawaii, Courtney was extradited to Miami-Dade County, Florida. She appeared in court for the first time in a beige jail uniform, her blonde hair pulled back, looking far different from the confident persona her millions of followers knew online. Prosecutors laid out their argument clearly. Christian Toby, a bumsily, had been killed during a heated argument, and the evidence showed it was not an accident or an act of self-defense. They claimed Courtney was the aggressor, a woman prone to violent outbursts who had finally gone too far. The prosecution presented early details of their case. The medical examiner's report was one of their strongest pieces of evidence. It showed that Christian's wound came from a powerful downward strike, not from a knife thrown across the room, as Courtney claimed. The blade had entered his chest about 3 inches deep and severed a major artery. There were also bruises and cuts on both of them, signs of a struggle, but the nature of the wound suggested close contact. Prosecutors said this matched a stabbing motion made during a physical fight, not a panic throw. They also introduced the elevator surveillance footage, recorded just weeks before Christian's death. The clip showed Courtney repeatedly hitting and pushing Christian as they argued in the building elevator. Christian appeared calm, trying to restrain her without striking back. This short video spread widely online, becoming a symbol of the prosecution's case. It suggested that Courtney had a history of aggression. Still, Courtney's defense team, led by attorney Frank Prieto, argued the footage didn't show the full picture. They said it was just one moment in a long and complicated relationship filled with mutual violence. According to them, Christian had physically and emotionally abused Courtney for months. They said she lived in fear, trapped in a toxic relationship that escalated until it exploded that April afternoon. As investigators collected digital evidence, text messages between the couple became crucial. Some messages reportedly showed Christian apologizing for aggressive behavior, while others showed Courtney using harsh, angry language. Both sides used the same messages to tell opposite stories, one of control and abuse, and another of frustration and fear. Meanwhile, Courtney's parents became part of the case. Authorities later accused them of accessing Christian's laptop without permission after his death, allegedly looking for information to help their daughter's defense. Though they faced their own legal scrutiny, Courtney's defense insisted they were only trying to help her gather evidence to prove her innocence. The media coverage was relentless. News outlets dissected every update, from courtroom filings to old social media posts. Commentators on YouTube and TikTok debated the case daily. Some believed Courtney was a manipulative influencer, hiding behind her looks and fame. Others thought she was a woman cornered by an abusive partner, punished for defending herself. In interviews, Christian's friends described him as loyal and kind, someone who would avoid violence whenever possible. They said he had shared fears about Courtney's temper and jealousy, and that he had been considering leaving her for good. His family echoed those claims, saying Christian was trying to move out and that his death came just days before he planned to start fresh. Courtney's side continued to paint a very different picture. Her legal team released statements saying she was not a cold-blooded killer, but a victim of years of emotional and physical abuse. They argued she had scars and bruises from earlier incidents that were never reported. They said her decision to seek therapy and rehab in Hawaii showed her effort to heal, not hide. The case moved slowly through the court system as both sides gathered evidence. Prosecutors focused on the pattern of violence, showing how police had responded to their apartment several times for domestic calls. They also highlighted building management records showing frequent disturbances from Unit 2201. To them, this was a pattern, a long chain of fights that ended in tragedy. Courtney's defense pushed back, saying those arguments ignored Christian's aggression and the fear she lived with. They filed motions claiming the state attorney's office should be disqualified for bias, arguing the case had become a media spectacle that could not guarantee a fair trial. But the court denied that request. Public attention didn't fade. Videos of the couple's happier times surfaced online, contrasting sharply with the violent details now being revealed. Fans scrolled through Courtney's old posts, smiling selfies, beach vacations, nights out, trying to make sense of how that same woman could end up charged with murder. Some of her followers sent letters of support. Others demanded justice for Christian. In jail, Courtney's behavior was closely watched. Reports from other inmates and guards described her as calm, sometimes emotional, but not violent. Her attorneys said she struggled with the pressure and isolation. She was kept under observation for her safety after media coverage intensified. Outside the courtroom, the discussion about domestic violence and gender roles grew louder. Many asked why police hadn't acted sooner when the couple's fights were so well known. Others questioned whether the system treated Courtney differently because of her fame and appearance. The story had moved beyond one couple's tragedy. It had become a mirror for how society views abuse, self-defense, and accountability. As the months passed, more evidence surfaced. The 911 call from that day became public. Courtney's voice was heard sobbing and begging for help. "My boyfriend is dying," she cried, as dispatchers tried to guide her through CPR instructions. The recording was heartbreaking, raw, and confusing. Some heard genuine panic and remorse. Others heard guilt. The apartment itself was another key piece of evidence. Photos from the scene showed blood trails leading from the kitchen to the living area, suggesting movement after the stabbing. Forensic experts testified that the knife likely wasn't thrown, as it would have lacked the force to cause such a deep wound. The scene supported the theory that she stabbed him during a close, physical fight. Despite the evidence, the defense kept its focus on context, the months of fighting, the fear, and the mental state Courtney was in that day. They claimed she had been pushed to her breaking point. They argued that Christian had physically restrained her, and that in the heat of the moment, she acted out of panic, not anger. Meanwhile, Christian's family continued to attend hearings, sitting quietly in the courtroom. His brother and parents spoke to reporters, describing their pain and disbelief. They wanted the world to remember Christian not as a victim of a scandal, but as a good man with dreams and a future cut short. By early 2023, the case had grown into one of the most high-profile homicide trials in Florida. News crews gathered outside the courthouse during every hearing. Documentaries and podcasts began covering the story, piecing together interviews and court filings to tell both sides of the tragedy. Through it all, Courtney remained in custody, denied bond. Prosecutors argued she was a flight risk and that the evidence of guilt was strong. The judge agreed, keeping her in jail as the trial date approached. Her defense team requested additional expert reviews, including psychological evaluations, to determine her mental state at the time of the killing. They said she suffered from post-traumatic stress and emotional instability caused by repeated domestic abuse. The prosecution countered that these claims were strategic, an attempt to shift blame and avoid responsibility. The case had become more than a criminal trial. It was now a media storm about image, gender, and perception. A beautiful influencer accused of a violent crime. A young man whose promising life was cut short. Two people caught in a destructive relationship that ended in death. By the middle of 2023, both sides had built powerful stories, one of survival, one of murder. And as the court prepared to move toward trial, the tension only grew stronger. The next stage would reveal what really happened in that Miami apartment, and whether the act that ended Christian's life was driven by fear, fury, or something in between. As the courtroom battle moved into its final stages, the story that began in a Miami high-rise reached a tense and emotional climax. The trial of Courtney Clenny versus the state of Florida had become more than a case about one violent night. It was now a reflection of love turned toxic, fame turned tragic, and the question of who was truly the victim. When the trial opened, both sides presented their versions of the same story, but through very different lenses. Prosecutors told the jury that Courtney Clenny, the 26-year-old OnlyFans model, was not the helpless victim she claimed to be. They said she was aggressive, controlling, and had a history of attacking Christian Toby Abumsley. They showed the elevator footage once more, playing it frame by frame, the way she lunged, struck, and shouted while Christian stood defensively. They said this pattern didn't end until the day she stabbed him through the chest. The prosecution's lead attorney walked the jury through the events of April 3, 2022, moment by moment. They described how neighbors heard screams, how security cameras caught the couple entering the apartment shortly before the stabbing, and how Courtney called 911 only after Christian was critically injured. The medical examiner's testimony was clear. The wound was deep, angled downward, and came from close contact. It was consistent with a stabbing motion made in anger, not an act of panic or self-defense. They also pointed out that Christian's body had bruises consistent with defensive wounds, marks on his hands and forearms, suggesting he had tried to block the knife or protect himself. The prosecution's theory was that the argument escalated as it often had before, but this time, Courtney grabbed the knife during rage rather than fear. Her defense team told a very different story. They described a young woman who had been emotionally and physically battered by her boyfriend, who had endured months of fear and intimidation. Her attorney said Courtney's reaction that day came from desperation, not cruelty. They argued that she was cornered in her own home, terrified of another violent episode, and that her instinct was to grab whatever was near to protect herself. Courtney took the stand in her own defense. Her testimony was emotional. She described the relationship as volatile and unpredictable. She said Christian had moments of love and charm, but also explosive anger. She said he would scream, break things, and had physically hurt her more than once. She said she never meant to kill him, that she threw the knife in a blind attempt to stop the assault. But the cross-examination from prosecutors was unrelenting. They pressed her on inconsistencies in her story. They asked how a knife could have pierced Christian's chest so deeply from 10 feet away. They pointed to texts where she had insulted and threatened him, to witness statements describing her temper. They replayed the 911 call, forcing her to relive the moment she realized he was dying. Christian's family sat through every word. His parents often looked away during the autopsy photos, his brother silent and unmoving. For them, this was not just a courtroom drama. It was the final chapter of a nightmare that began with a phone call saying Christian had been killed. The defense called a psychologist who testified that Courtney suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and borderline personality disorder, both of which could have affected her reactions under stress. They said her behavior that day was consistent with someone in fight or flight mode. But the prosecution countered that psychological terms could not erase physical evidence. The wound was deliberate, they said, and the act was too precise to be an accident. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy continued. Cameras lined the steps each morning. True crime podcasts released episode after episode, breaking down new testimony. Comment sections and social media feeds filled with debates. Was she a battered woman fighting for her life, or a jealous influencer who couldn't control her anger? The closing arguments summed up the contrast. The prosecution said Christian Abumsali's death was the predictable end of an abusive pattern that Courtney had created. They reminded the jury of the video evidence, the autopsy report, and the history of calls to police. They told them that Christian's last words, caught faintly on the 911 recording, were pleas for help. The defense made its final appeal with quiet emotion. They reminded the jury of Courtney's tears on the stand, of her scars, and of the chaos that defined their relationship. They said the case wasn't black and white, that fear, trauma, and panic can drive anyone to make a fatal mistake. They asked for understanding, not condemnation. When the jury left to deliberate, the courtroom was silent. Reporters waited outside for hours as the families on both sides sat apart, exhausted and anxious. Finally, after long deliberation, the jury returned. Courtney Clenny was found guilty of second-degree murder. The verdict struck the courtroom with a mix of relief and heartbreak. Christian's family wept quietly, holding hands as the decision was read. Courtney sat still, staring forward, her expression blank as the reality settled in. The judge thanked the jury and later moved to sentencing. During the hearing, Christian's mother spoke directly to Courtney. Her voice shook as she described the pain of losing her son, the man who had been her pride and joy. She said no verdict could bring him back, but hoped the decision would give their family some peace. When it was Courtney's turn to speak, she stood and apologized through tears. She said she never wanted Christian to die, that she still loved him, and that her actions were driven by fear, not hate. She asked his family for forgiveness, though she knew it might never come. The judge, addressing both families, spoke about the tragedy of two lives destroyed by violence. He said the case was a reminder of how quickly anger and fear can end in irreversible loss. Then he sentenced Courtney Clenny to 25 years in prison. As the verdict spread, the public reaction was divided. Some said justice had finally been served. Others argued that the sentence didn't account for the years of abuse she described. Legal analysts debated whether the outcome was fair or a reflection of bias. But for those who knew Christian, it was simply an ending, a painful, incomplete one, but an ending nonetheless. In the months that followed, documentaries and investigative specials revisited the case. Friends and family gave interviews, sharing memories of Christian's kindness and energy. They described a man who was ambitious, supportive, and loved by many. Courtney's supporters continued to defend her online, insisting she had been mistreated and misunderstood. The apartment where it all happened, once a symbol of luxury, was sold quietly. The neighbors moved on, but the story left a mark on the building's history. In the end, the OnlyFans model Miami stabbing became more than just a headline. It became a cautionary tale about relationships that turn violent, about how love and control can blur until tragedy strikes. It reminded people that what looks perfect on the outside can hide deep pain within. Two young lives full of promise collided in one fatal moment, leaving behind grief, confusion, and lessons that came too late. Courtney Clenny lost her freedom. Christian Abumsali lost his life. And together, their story became one of the most haunting reminders of how fragile human relationships can be when anger replaces compassion. In 2012, a shocking video surfaced online, so disturbing that many thought it couldn't be real. But it was. What began as a missing person case in Montreal would unravel into an international manhunt, exposing one man's chilling obsession with fame and the horrifying murder that made him infamous. In May 2012, Montreal became the center of one of the most chilling and widely publicized murder cases in modern Canadian history. It began as an ordinary spring month in Quebec's largest city, but quickly spiraled into a dark and disturbing story that captured global attention. At the heart of this tragedy were two men, Luca Rocco Magnotta, a 29-year-old aspiring model and internet personality from Toronto, and June Lin, a 33-year-old international student from Wuhan, China, who had come to Canada to study and build a better future. June Lin was studying computer engineering at Concordia University in Montreal. Friends described him as quiet, polite, and kind-hearted. He lived a simple life, balancing his studies with part-time work at a convenience store. His move from China to Canada was a major step toward independence. He enjoyed technology, socializing with classmates, and exploring life in Montreal. Lin was in the early stages of a relationship, but he was also open to meeting new people online. It was through one of these online connections that he met Luca Magnotta. Luca Magnotta was the opposite of Lin in almost every way. Born Eric Clinton Kirk Newman in Scarborough, Ontario, Magnotta had a troubled past marked by instability and a deep craving for attention. He changed his name in his early 20s, trying to reinvent himself as someone glamorous and mysterious. He dabbled in modeling and adult films, posting provocative photos of himself online and fabricating stories about his life. He created fake social media accounts that praised his looks and career, feeding into his desire for recognition. By 2010, Magnotta had already gained a dark reputation on the internet. Anonymous users on forums like 4chan and Reddit had been hunting for him after a series of videos surfaced showing animal cruelty, including one of a man killing kittens. Many believed Magnotta was behind the videos, though he repeatedly denied it. This online attention only seemed to encourage him. He thrived on being discussed, whether the attention was positive or negative. Those who tracked him online described him as narcissistic, manipulative, and deeply disturbed. By 2012, Luca Magnotta was living in a small apartment on Décarie Boulevard in Montreal. He was behind on rent, living mostly in isolation, and still trying to project an image of success. He posted frequently on social media and kept up his online personas. But behind that carefully crafted image was a growing darkness. In late May 2012, Jun Lin disappeared. His friends and co-workers grew worried when he stopped showing up for work and didn't respond to calls or messages. Police were alerted, but at first, no one had any idea that his disappearance would turn into one of Canada's most shocking crimes. On the night of May 24, 2012, Jun Lin went to Magnotta's apartment after responding to an online ad. Security cameras in the building captured him entering the complex with Magnotta at around 10:15 p.m. That would be the last time Lin was seen alive. Over the next several hours, an unthinkable act took place inside that small apartment. Luca Magnotta murdered Jun Lin in what was later determined to be a planned and deliberate killing. What made the crime even more horrifying was that Magnotta filmed it. The next day, a video appeared online under the title, "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick." It showed a man bound to a bed, stabbed repeatedly with an ice pick and knife, and later dismembered. The video also included acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. The person in the video, later confirmed to be Jun Lin, was unrecognizable to most, but investigators would eventually trace the footage back to Magnotta. As disturbing as the video was, it wasn't immediately clear if it was real. Many viewers initially believed it was staged or part of a horror film. But within days, the truth started to surface. On May 29, 2012, staff members at the Conservative Party of Canada's headquarters in Ottawa received a package in the mail. Inside was a human foot, wrapped carefully and stained with blood. A second package, this one sent to the Liberal Party, contained a human hand. Both packages included notes written in red ink and referenced political figures in a taunting way. Around the same time, building staff in Montreal discovered a large, blood-stained suitcase in the garbage area behind Magnotta's apartment. Inside was a human torso, badly decomposed and stuffed inside plastic. The body parts matched those found in the mail packages. It was clear a gruesome murder had taken place. Montreal police arrived at the apartment complex and quickly identified the unit linked to Magnotta. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. The apartment was in chaos. There were blood stains on the walls, bed, and floor. Cleaning supplies were scattered around the room, and several items had been hastily removed. Investigators found a poster of the film Basic Instinct, a movie famous for a murder scene involving an ice pick, the same weapon used in the killing. They also found a bottle of vodka, a newspaper dated May 25th, and evidence suggesting that Magnotta had filmed and edited the murder video on his computer before uploading it online. By the time police arrived, Luca Magnotta was gone. He had already fled Canada. He left behind his cat, personal belongings, and even his identification card. Detectives quickly connected the dots: the mailed body parts, the video, and the missing student. Within days, an arrest warrant was issued for Luca Rocco Magnotta, charging him with first-degree murder, committing indignities to a human body, publishing obscene material, and using the Postal Service to send human remains. Interpol issued a red notice, making Magnotta a wanted man in more than 190 countries. News of the crime spread rapidly. International headlines called it the Canadian cannibal case, though the term was later criticized as sensational. The murder shocked both Canada and the world not only for its brutality, but also because it had been broadcast online. Police across multiple countries began tracking Magnotta's movements. Back in Montreal, investigators worked to confirm the identity of the victim. DNA tests and dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to June Lin. His friends and family were devastated. Lin's parents traveled from China to Canada after hearing the news. They described him as a loving son who had big dreams and a gentle heart. His death left them broken and searching for answers that would never bring him back. Meanwhile, Luca Magnotta was on the move. He flew from Montreal to Paris shortly after the murder, using a fake passport and different names. From there, he traveled across Europe, staying in cheap hotels and avoiding major airports. Despite his efforts to disappear, he couldn't resist checking the internet for updates about himself. Authorities traced his online activity as he searched for news articles about the case and his own name. By the end of May, the story had become one of the most followed manhunts in modern history. Every major news outlet covered it, and online communities that had once mocked Magnotta now helped spread information that led to his capture. The public's horror grew with every new discovery, new body parts, new clues, new headlines describing the gruesome details. At this stage, there was still no sign of Magnotta's location, but investigators knew it was only a matter of time before he made a mistake. Despite his careful planning and his attempts to hide, Luca Magnotta's need for attention would become his downfall. The world watched as the man who had spent years trying to be famous became infamous for a reason no one could have imagined. The investigation was closing in, and the hunt for him had crossed oceans. What started as a missing person report had now become a global pursuit of a killer who craved recognition above everything else. The next phase would reveal how far he went to escape, and how the obsession that drove him to commit murder would eventually lead to his capture. When Luca Magnotta fled Montreal, he left behind a trail of horror that stretched far beyond the apartment where June Lin was killed. The gruesome video, the mailed body parts, and the shocking crime scene had already made headlines worldwide. What followed next was one of the most intense international manhunts in modern times. Police in Canada, Interpol, and Europol were all working together to track him down. Montreal investigators pieced together Magnotta's movements from airport footage, credit card activity, and witness statements. They learned he had boarded a flight from Montreal to Paris just hours after the killing. He carried very little luggage and used a fake name. French authorities confirmed he arrived in Paris on May 26, 2012, blending easily into the busy airport crowd. In Paris, Magnotta moved constantly, staying in cheap hotels and hostels to avoid detection. He paid mostly in cash, changed his appearance, and kept to himself. Witnesses later described him as quiet but nervous, often checking mirrors and looking over his shoulder. French police searched several locations after receiving tips, but kept missing him by only hours. His name and face were now known worldwide, appearing on television, newspapers, and online news feeds. Yet, despite the massive search, he managed to stay hidden for nearly 2 weeks. During this time, more horrifying discoveries continued to emerge back in Canada. Packages containing June Lin's other body parts were found in Vancouver, sent to 2 elementary schools. The children never saw the contents, But school staff immediately alerted authorities after noticing the strange, blood-stained parcels. The discovery deepened the horror. It showed that Magnotta wanted to cause maximum fear and shock. Each act seemed designed for attention. Montreal police held regular press briefings, trying to balance transparency with the sensitivity of the case. They revealed that Magnotta had carefully planned everything. He'd rented the apartment under a different name, bought cleaning supplies and tools beforehand, and even edited the murder video before leaving the country. The crime was not an impulsive act. It was deliberate, calculated, and carried out with a disturbing sense of performance. While investigators searched for him across Europe, journalists and online users traced his movements in real time. Reports surfaced that he had been seen in Paris nightclubs, internet cafes, and even near a cemetery. The attention fueled public fascination and fear. The man who once begged for fame had now achieved it, though in the most horrifying way imaginable. Magnotta's online history gave police deeper insight into his mind. He had created dozens of fake profiles and fan pages about himself, filled with staged photos, false interviews, and self-written articles praising his looks and talent. He often referenced fame, movies, and celebrity culture. It became clear that Magnotta saw life as a stage, and his crime, as twisted as it was, as a form of performance. Meanwhile, June Lin's family arrived in Montreal to claim his remains. They faced the unimaginable pain of knowing what had happened to their son. At Concordia University, students and staff held a memorial, lighting candles and sharing memories of June Lin as a kind and hopeful person who dreamed of working in technology. His parents spoke through translators, expressing gratitude to Canadians for their support and sorrow for the cruelty their son had endured. Their grief added a human face to the story, a reminder that behind the global headlines was a real man, brutally taken from those who loved him. Back in Europe, the manhunt reached a turning point. Investigators discovered that Magnotta had left Paris and taken a bus to Germany. He was believed to have traveled through several countries using false identities. Interpol continued to circulate his image, warning that he might try to flee to another continent. Police stations across Europe were alerted, and his photo was plastered across airports, bus terminals, and train stations. Magnotta arrived in Berlin in early June 2012. There he checked into a small, low-budget hostel in the Neukölln district, an area known for its immigrant communities and modest lodgings. He kept a low profile, but couldn't resist the one thing that always drew him back, the internet. He frequently visited local cybercafes, spending hours online reading articles about himself. His obsession with his own notoriety would lead to his downfall. On June 4, 2012, nearly 2 weeks after the murder, Magnotta entered an internet cafe called Helen Internet Cafe in Berlin. He logged onto a computer, browsing news stories about the manhunt and watching videos discussing his crime. The cafe's manager, Kadir Anlaisli, noticed him. He had seen Magnotta's face on the news and recognized him almost immediately. At first, Kadir wasn't certain. He walked around the cafe, glancing discreetly at the man's screen. When he saw Magnotta reading an article about himself, he quietly stepped away and called the police. Within minutes, German officers arrived. They approached Magnotta, who tried to give a fake name, but it was too late. When asked for identification, he hesitated, and the officers confirmed his identity. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, when they handcuffed him, he reportedly said, "You got me." The arrest brought an end to an international chase that had gripped the world. Canadian authorities immediately began working on his extradition. While in German custody, Magnotta appeared calm and detached. He showed little emotion when questioned. Reports from police described him as polite, almost eerily composed, and still preoccupied with how the media was covering his story. Back in Canada, news of the capture spread quickly. Montreal police held a press conference announcing that Luca Rocco Magnotta had been arrested in Berlin after a massive global effort. Relief spread across the country, but the sense of horror remained. Investigators still had to piece together the full details of June Lin's murder and uncover the psychological reasoning behind such brutality. In the days following his arrest, German police searched the area where Magnotta had been staying. They found discarded clothes, several fake IDs, and travel documents under different names. He had been living under a false identity and planning his next move, possibly another escape attempt. He seemed obsessed with keeping track of how the world was responding to his case, reading every news article he could find. The extradition process moved quickly. On June 18, 2012, Magnotta was flown back to Canada under heavy security. He was escorted by Montreal police officers aboard a military plane and landed at Mirabel Airport, just outside Montreal. Dozens of reporters were waiting. As he was led away in handcuffs, cameras flashed, and for a moment he seemed to get what he had always wanted: attention. Upon his return, Magnotta was charged with first-degree murder, committing indignities to a human body, publishing obscene material, and mailing obscene objects. The case shocked even seasoned detectives. They described it as the most disturbing investigation of their careers. Every new detail revealed how meticulously Magnotta had planned the killing. He had chosen June Lin carefully, set up the camera, and edited the footage to create maximum impact before uploading it online. Forensic experts examined Magnotta's apartment and computer files, confirming that the video had been edited and distributed from his own device. They also found internet searches about cannibalism, dismemberment, and serial killers. He had studied similar crimes, possibly drawing inspiration from old films and notorious cases. The public reaction to the case was intense. Some people couldn't believe that someone could commit such an act simply for attention. Others pointed to signs of mental illness, suggesting that Magnotta's long history of delusion and identity disorder had finally reached a breaking point. Still, nothing could justify what had happened to June Lin. As the legal process moved forward, the court ordered psychiatric evaluations. Doctors examined Magnotta's mental state to determine if he was fit to stand trial. They found evidence of personality disorders and psychosis, but concluded that he was capable of understanding his actions. The question of motive became central. Was this a calculated crime driven by narcissism, or the act of someone detached from reality? Meanwhile, June Lin's family continued to grieve in silence. They stayed in Canada for months, attending memorials and cooperating with investigators. They wanted justice, not vengeance. Lin's father described his son as a man full of kindness and ambition, someone who came to Canada for opportunity and ended up as the victim of unimaginable cruelty. By late 2012, preparations for the trial were underway. Prosecutors gathered evidence: the video, digital records, witness testimonies, and forensic reports. The video was the strongest piece. It left no doubt about who committed the murder and how. The challenge would be to prove that Magnotta knew exactly what he was doing. The media continued to cover every development. True crime documentaries, talk shows, and online discussions dissected every detail of the case. The story had elements that made it impossible to ignore: an attention-seeking killer, a kind and innocent victim, and a crime that played out in the digital age for the world to see. As Luca Magnotta sat in custody awaiting trial, the world waited to see how justice would unfold. The investigation had ended, but the courtroom would soon become the stage for the final act of a story that had already shaken the world. Luca Magnotta's trial began in late 2014 at the Quebec Superior Court in Montreal. The courtroom was filled with journalists, police officers, and members of the public who had followed the story since it broke. Every seat was taken, and security was tight. The murder of June Lin had shaken not just Canada, but much of the world, and people wanted to understand how a man could commit such an act. Magnotta faced 5 charges: first-degree murder, committing indignities to a human body, publishing obscene material, mailing obscene objects, and criminal harassment of the Prime Minister and other government members who had received the body parts. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The video, the forensic reports, the fingerprints on the mailed packages, and DNA evidence all pointed directly to him. Still, his defense argued that this was not a case of a sane man making choices. They claimed he was psychotic and suffering from schizophrenia at the time of the murder, unable to understand what he was doing. The prosecution painted a different picture. They described Luca Magnotta as a narcissist who had planned the killing for months, rehearsing it in his mind and on film. They pointed to the way he recorded and edited the murder video, the choice of the ice pick, and the deliberate mailing of body parts. Prosecutors argued that this was a man who wanted to become famous at any cost, even if it meant turning murder into a performance. Over the course of the trial, jurors heard from witnesses who had known both men. June Lin's friend spoke softly about the kind of person he was, thoughtful, respectful, and hardworking. He had no enemies and had been living a quiet, hopeful life in Canada. One of his professors described him as a bright student who loved learning. His parents, who had flown in from China, sat through every session, their faces quiet with grief. Experts took the stand to discuss Magnotta's mental state. Psychiatrists who had examined him presented conflicting opinions. Some testified that Magnotta showed signs of schizophrenia and paranoia, possibly worsened by years of isolation and an unstable identity. Others said he was fully aware of his actions, noting how carefully he had planned the murder, fled the country, and watched media coverage of his own crime. His behavior before, during, and after the killing showed method, not madness. The prosecution highlighted several key points that proved intent. Magnotta had rented the apartment under a false name. He had purchased the knife, the camera, and the cleaning materials in advance. He had searched online for ways to dismember a body and dispose of evidence. After the killing, he deleted files, packed his belongings, and left for Europe with fake documents. Each of these steps, prosecutors said, demonstrated that he knew exactly what he was doing. The video itself was not shown in open court out of respect for June Lin's family, but jurors viewed it privately as part of the evidence. Investigators who had seen it described it as methodical and chilling, with Magnotta appearing calm and deliberate throughout. The video left no question about who the killer was. As the trial went on, Magnotta sat quietly in the courtroom, rarely speaking. He listened as witnesses described his crimes, showing little visible emotion. At times, he appeared detached, staring blankly ahead. The jury heard that during his years before the murder, he had created an alternate world online, filled with fake interviews and fan pages where he presented himself as a star. That fantasy world had finally collided with reality in the most tragic way. When the defense presented its case, Magnotta's lawyer argued that his client was suffering from severe mental illness and could not appreciate the nature of his actions. He said Magnotta believed he was being watched, followed, and manipulated by unseen forces. But the jury was not convinced. They believed the evidence showed planning, awareness, and control. After 12 weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned its verdict on December 23, 2014. Luca Rocco Magnotta was found guilty on all charges. He was convicted of first-degree murder for killing June Lin, along with the 4 related charges. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Magnotta showed no visible reaction. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. For the other charges, he received concurrent sentences. He was sent to a maximum security prison in Quebec, where he remains today. For June Lin's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but no peace. They spoke through tears, thanking the police, the court, and the people of Canada for their support. June Lin's father said his son's life had been full of promise, and that nothing could fill the emptiness his death had left behind. The case of Luca Magnotta and June Lin left a lasting scar on Canada's collective memory. It revealed how the hunger for attention and the reach of the internet could combine in terrifying ways. It also exposed how mental illness, unchecked and untreated, can grow into something dangerous when mixed with narcissism and fantasy. In the years since, the story has been the subject of documentaries and analysis, most notably the Netflix series Don't Mess with Cats, which explored the online communities that had tried to expose Magnotta before the murder. The case remains one of the most disturbing examples of a crime committed in the digital age, a murder filmed, edited, and shared for the world to see. June Lin's story, however, is not just about his death. It is about a young man who came to Canada for opportunity and friendship, who worked hard and was loved by those around him. His memory continues to be honored at Concordia University, where scholarships and memorials have been established in his name. Luka Magnotta's life now continues behind bars, far from the fame he once sought. His name lives on in court records and crime reports, a cautionary example of how obsession, cruelty, and delusion can destroy lives. The case stands as a grim reminder that evil often wears an ordinary face, and that sometimes the most disturbing stories are not born in darkness, but on the glowing screens of the modern world.